good, or is it going to have, I don't know, what kind of effects?
Definitely. Yeah. I think somebody said that WikiLeaks was the September 11th for democracy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's extremely unfortunate that this happened. I find that it is extremely cynical because I can understand the importance of setting up a website through which those who feel that they have been oppressed within their companies or organizations can stand up and put forward their case and put forward documents to show how institutions are trying to hide the truth from people. I can understand that there's a need for that in terms of our whole understanding of transparency. But to publish a random collection of correspondences between embassies and a capital and to begin drawing conclusions on that for how policy is made is very dangerous. And the reason that diplomacy and that can function is that you can retain some level of confidentiality between governments. And this is not aimed at, it is not aimed against the people or against transparency. This is how we all function. I don't think there's a human being around the world that would be happy to have their thoughts exposed to the rest of the world, let alone the internal workings of a machinery. I can imagine that people will now be a little bit more careful in what they say and how they say it, and I hope that. I think it's been some time now, and I think this is we've been convinced already that it's not going to undermine the credibility or the trust of between the United States and its allies and NATO, and this is very important because our own security as a country, Bulgaria, our own security within NATO, the security of the whole of the Western world relies on the trust that we have within the North Atlantic Alliance. And I know that initially people were saying, well, this will undermine that trust. Very happy to see that this hasn't undermined that trust.
That's true. Actually, a couple of things that everybody has been wondering about is this random selection, as you said. Who chooses these? Which ones are going to be released? Because they have certain groups, they actually also are quite satisfactory for others. And what's the selection? What's the reasoning behind this? So if you're actually really serving the good of the people, if you really believe this is what you're doing, then release all of the documents. Why are you choosing certain ones and deciding which ones people should be reading? That's one criticism that a lot of the Turkish media has raised.
But it's also the fact that if you read one and start making assumptions about policy, that is a very wrong approach because it gives you a very twisted perspective on how policy is formulated. Maybe one day when they're all out there, people will sit down in universities and analyze them and study and come to conclusions on how certain political decisions were reached. That would be quite useful. But the idea that you read, 2 paragraphs and between, ambassador and capital, and you take them completely out of context and you say, well, this is how policy is explained, is quite dangerous.
Actually, once these documents were released, the Turkish Foreign Ministry, their reply was, we're really happy that we don't use any digital forms to communicate.
Well, I will let you, on a secret, I was very critical of how some of my own telegrams were being written in my ministry, but once these documents came out, I think I withdrew all of my criticism and said, you guys are doing a good job. Keep doing it.
That being conservative in this matter actually has helped. Yeah. It's kind of like Turkey now because of the latest financial crisis, because we didn't have a mature enough market for mortgages. We actually had it easier for us. Sometimes it helps you. Actually, one of the other things that I'd like to ask you about is in Bulgaria, a lot of discussion about the good old days and referring to the communist period, obviously, and according to a Pew poll, when asked about democracy, 76% of Bulgarians said they were dissatisfied, which to me, obviously, as somebody who comes from Turkey, is very difficult to understand.
I don't think there's a lot of discussion about the good old days.
But in this poll that I read...
if you were, 20 or 30 in the 70s, and you're, 60 or 80 now, you think of the good old days. But the dissatisfaction, perhaps, that people can feel is more to do with the slow rate of change that we've seen over the last few years, particularly. There were a lot of expectations that membership in the European Union would somehow immediately change a lot of things, and it doesn't.
And also it came at a very bad time. Probably.
Exactly, changes it very slowly, and then we had the financial crisis, which hit all of us. To address this, there's a lot of debate how that should be addressed. Whether it should be by the government going on a spending spree, or being fiscally very conservative and focusing investment in a more limited manner, but where investment is vital. Our assessment is that the second option is better, that we take the limited resources that we have under the constraints of the crisis, match them with the funding that we can access from the European Union, and invest in projects that will create infrastructure in the country, and that will have a long-term effect for integrating the country better into its markets. And this is why a lot of the efforts that the government is now focusing on is on infrastructure and roads and things like that. Of course, there's also the other side of things, that a lot of Bulgaria's development over the last 20 years has been delayed by the slow pace of reform and modernization in our judiciary. And this has led to, all these stories about corruption and
this
crime.
This is what I was getting at, actually. I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So for us, if you look at the, if I had to answer how do you get out of the economic crisis for a country like Bulgaria, I would say two things. One is focus on infrastructure, where you can generate jobs for people, and second, do these things that have been delayed for 20 years. Reform of judiciary, security, more transparency of government, these things. Making business easier, making the administration much more flexible, more accessible to people.
Because actually last week it was the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe that singled out Bulgaria and Turkey along with other 6 states for violating the European Convention on Human Rights due to major systemic deficiencies. So I was wondering what these systemic deficiencies are in Bulgaria as opposed to, for example, in Turkey, because we talk about this all the time in Turkey about how we can improve it, but you were just talking about it, so...
Well, I would say that this is definitely one, and these are some, and some of the other problems are probably stem from the fact that in the European Court of Human Rights we have a lot of cases that sort of repeat themselves, that go back to certain legislative changes which we need to do in our own system. And to make sure that we close loopholes with our own legislation. I know that the Ministry of Justice has put together a plan to address that. I know vaguely of it. We haven't discussed it yet in the government session, but they've already identified these weaknesses that they want to address.
As a last question, Minister, what are the current state of affairs between Turkey and Bulgaria? I know that they're quite well, actually, but I'm sure.
I think we have probably the best relationship that we've had for many years. We're looking at a number of common projects. I plan to come to Ankara in the next couple of months, and we are working on having a joint session of our two governments to address issues that are both of bilateral concern, but also issues in which we can work together in the Balkans, in sort of our wider neighborhood, and cooperate. And I think this is it's very important that we have this open dialogue between the governments and our two prime ministers, talk regularly, and have a very good exchange of ideas on how we can cooperate. So I hope that within the next 3 months, or by the summer of this year at least, we will be able to finalize a large number of agreements that have been on the table for a long time. We did this with Greece last year, and it was very, very successful.
Hopefully. Thank you very much for this wonderful interview. I'm sure the Turkish viewers are going to be very interested in listening to what you said. Thank you. Liderler ve Kararlar programında bu hafta izlediğiniz gibi Bulgaristan Dışişleri Bakanı ile birçok ilginç konuyu konuştuk. Bu konular içinde herhalde hepimizin en çok ilgisini çeken konulardan biri Türkiye ile Bulgaristan'ın sınırında inşa edilmekte olan yeni duvar adı verilebilecek sınır kapısı ve örtüsü ve tabii ki Orta Doğu'daki şu son yaşanan gelişmeler. Önümüzdeki hafta Liderler ve Kararlar'da yeniden birlikte olana kadar hoşça kalın.